All right, there we go. All right, 100%. That's great. And we're going to need it because today we're talking about Judas Iscariot. So we need to be at full battery power for Judas Iscariot. So friends, if you're new to the Bible, all four Gospels mention Judas Iscariot. But if you were to go home and just do a Google search, Bible passages for Judas Iscariot, or you just looked at BibleGateway.com and just searched his name, there's really not a lot about him. He really just shows up for the story that most people know him for. If you're new to the Christian faith and you don't know who Judas is, you're going to get an intro to one of the most enigmatic, mysterious, tragic figures. Someone that we only bring out and talk about during Lent, at a time where we kind of experience church in the minor key, where we're more open to some of the more intense themes that we could have. And one of the things that I tried to do during this past week, getting ready for the sermon, is to kind of hold on to everything that I knew about Judas, but also kind of opened up, like what are kind of the assumptions that I'm making? It's like, oh, Judas Iscariot, I've got this. I know this story. But is there more to the story? Is there a different kind of perspective or angle that we could take that could really open it up? The difficult journey with someone like Judas is that you really think it's about him and only him. But the reality of the Gospels, they work on so many levels that when you look at Judas and how he betrayed Jesus, and you look at Peter and how he denied Jesus, the reason why we don't have a lot of details about these people is because we can make the mistake of thinking that it's about somebody else, when really these stories are about us. They're about us with all of our potential, all of the strengths that we have, and also all of the ways that we fall short. And when we're really open about that and honest about that, that's how we can actually grow. That's how we can change. It's how we can become deeper people. And so, friends, today we are in the Gospel of Matthew. And we're going to open up to Matthew chapter 26, and we'll start at verse 14. If you're new to the Bible, Matthew's in the New Testament. It's the first book of the New Testament. If you find yourself in Mark and Luke, it's great reading, but you missed it. You got to go back, go left, and you'll find Matthew. So, friends, the grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of the Lord stands forever. So I invite you to stand for the reading of Holy Scripture today. Matthew 26, verse 14. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him," meaning Jesus, "over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. And from then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. And we're going to skip this next part to get to verse 47. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. And with him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. And Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions, probably Peter, reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Put your sword back in its place," Jesus said to him. "For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think that I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" In that hour, Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets may be fulfilled." And then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Go ahead and have a seat. All right, so let's just start right back up there at verse 14. It says, "Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests." As I was looking for things on Judas Iscariot, there's all kinds of theories, but no one really knows. The only detail that we have in all four Gospels before this is that Judas Iscariot was one of the 12 disciples, and the Apostle John uses the detail, or adds the detail, that he was the treasurer of the 12, of Jesus' ministry. So maybe Judas had a CPA, he had a background in accounting. The name Iscariot is even mysterious. So the name Iscariot could mean of Kerioth, which is a town south of Hebron in Judea. Interesting details, because the other 11 disciples were all from Galilee, from the towns of Capernaum, Bethsaida. At the north shore of the Sea of Galilee, Judas was the only one from the Jerusalem area. So a lot of people think maybe Judas was the one who had connection. He had power. He had access to influence. It would be like all of the disciples were from the hills of Tennessee, except one. He was from Washington, D.C. And you're kind of like, that's an interesting detail. But they're not even 100% sure that that's what Iscariot means. Some people think that the word Iscariot means of the Sicarii. The Sicarii were a militant right-wing group that were incredibly violent, trying to throw a revolution against the Romans. And that Sicarii means that they wielded a dagger on their left side. And so they think maybe Judas was one of these revolutionaries, and that's why he's trying to push Jesus into rebellion. But they don't know. It's just a theory. We don't know that much about Judas. Did he have brothers and sisters? What was his relationship like with his parents? How did he grow up? What was he like? What was his personality like? Was he an introvert or was he an extrovert? Was he someone who just genuinely liked talking with people, or was he kind of a more reserved? What did he go through that led him up to this point? And what you kind of understand when you read these things is you're like, I don't know really anything about this guy. As many of you know, I'm in a continuing education group at Morristown Hospital, and there's 7 of us in the group this year. And what you find is like we all spent some time together, and we did the thing that all kind of people do and Americans do. So, what do you do for a living? Where are you from? Maybe we talk about hobbies, and that's always how we start to get to know people, and we think we know people just by kind of spending time with them, knowing what they do for a living, knowing where they grew up. But we had this assignment this past year called a grief paper. And listen to this. This is a fun little Tuesday for you, if you ever want to do it. The grief paper was to look back at your life and count up all the loss that you've experienced. And really put it on a timeline. The people that you've lost, maybe the jobs that you've lost, the friendships that you've lost. Like really think about what loss means and really put it down on paper. And then pick one and dive deeply into it. And think about all the people that this loss impacted. If it was a family member, think about how other people in your family experienced that loss. Call one of them, your brother, your sister, a cousin, a friend, and say, what do you remember about this? How has this impacted you? And so we read the paper of all of our loss. We take the one and we do a deep dive on it. And everyone has to listen. Each one of us gets an hour. Paper after paper, hour after hour. Part of the experience is how much can you listen to people? Can you actually sit and listen to someone tell their story for an hour and recall it? Talk about it. Ask questions about it with them. And what I found is I'm like, I thought I knew this person because I knew their name, where they grew up, what they did, but I didn't know anything about them until they really started talking about their loss. So what do we really know about Judas? I think about that with like everyone sitting here, for example, right? It's like everyone, if you look to your left and to your right, people have been through some stuff. They've been through a lot. They've experienced a lot. And what I learned by sitting with this group of 7 strangers, 6 other people, 7 of us total, so I'm like, wow, I have a lot more empathy for you now. Now I kind of know where you're coming from when you talk about things in this way. I feel like I understand you in a totally different way now. And you really get to know people. And I was thinking about our church and how we experience things. That everybody in this room has gone through some stuff. And if we really sit down with each other and listen to each other for the goal of understanding, not just waiting to talk, that you really know each other in a different way. It just kind of struck me this week on the details of Judas's life. We don't know what he went through that led him up to this moment. We don't know anything about him. All of the gospel writers hold back so that we see ourselves in him. And so here's Judas, who's probably the accountant of the group, and for whatever reason, he's decided that he is no longer supporting Jesus, and he thinks Jesus has to go. We don't know the motivation. It never even says why. Why does he do this? We don't know, but what we know is that he does. In verse 14, it says one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, who might have been from Kerioth, but we don't know, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" Now, I'm not a master negotiator. I don't like negotiating. But I do know if you lead with, "What are you willing to give me?" And they're like, 30 pieces of silver? Deal. Sounds good. This is the accountant of the group. And he just is like, deal. I would have taken less. 30 pieces of silver. I know what you're wondering. How much is that? Most scholars think that's somewhere between $10,000 and $12,000. $10,000 and $12,000 in modern day money. So he hands over Jesus, this guy who invited him to follow him, who he thought was the Savior of the world, thought might be God himself, hands him over for a used Toyota Corolla. He's like, would have taken less. Would have taken less. It's one of those really interesting details of like, how much contempt did Judas have? That he's like, just whatever you give me, I'll take it. So he takes the 30 pieces of silver. And from then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, now I got to skip down. Okay, verse 47. While he was still speaking, so now they've moved over to the Garden of Gethsemane. It's after the Last Supper. Super important detail. Judas is betraying Jesus, and Judas is still offered communion at the Last Supper. You want to talk about whoever you are, wherever you've been, whatever you've done, you're welcome here. Jesus knows Judas is going to betray him. And instead of kicking him out and saying this meal is only for the fully committed, this meal is only for the holy people, this meal is only for the ones who have got it all right, he offers Judas communion. Powerful. That was actually the ending of my sermon, and I just said it now. Oh no, okay. So while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived with him with a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them, and this is just so like, just like a knife. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. How about the one I point at? Hey, that's Jesus. Get him. But this is personal to Judas, for whatever reason. It's really personal. The one I kiss, that's him. That's the signal. Could have been anything. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi." Oh, I want to know the tone. I want to know the tone so bad. What was this scene like? "Greetings, Rabbi." Now, if you read the New Testament, the title that people give Jesus is really important. Some people call him teacher. Some people call him Lord if they really believe that he is the one, the Messiah, the one sent into the world by God, right? But he says Rabbi, which means my teacher. So on the one hand, it's personal, like, greetings, my teacher. But on the other hand, he doesn't call him Lord. So greetings, Rabbi. And he kissed him. And Jesus replied, "Do what you came here for, friend." So the men stepped forward and seized Jesus and arrested him. And with that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword. In the Gospel of John, it says it's Peter. Peter reaches for his sword, and he reached for his sword, drew it out, and he struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. And in, I believe it's Luke's version or John's version, Jesus picks up the ear and heals the guy, puts it back on, and heals him. But in Matthew's version, he says, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword." And you think about all those people that are standing there, all those disciples, they're like, "It's Judas." They're looking out and they're like, "This used to be one of us." And he comes forward and betrays Jesus with a kiss. And so Peter's response is my response, 100%. I'd be like, "Oh, I'm going to take care of this right now." Right? So Peter picks up a sword because what he's experiencing right now is what we all experience. That anger, that rage, betrayal. It's like the hottest of it, right? The hottest of those feelings. I'm gonna do something about this. I'm gonna get violent. He draws his sword, cuts off the guy's ear, which, classic Peter, didn't even do the job right? Wields his sword, just gets an ear. Okay, glad he wasn't more precise. Otherwise, Jesus would have had to really pull off a beheading, healing miracle. But he gets an ear, knocks it off. And Jesus tells him, "Why do you have a sword? Put your sword away." And remember, this isn't just about Peter. This is about all of us who experience that anger, that fire, that vengeance. I just want him to get theirs. I want to make him feel how I feel. That's what I want. And I want to see it. I want to know that they're hurting too. I don't like being the only one that's hurting. I want them to feel it too. Put away the sword. Because everyone who lives by the sword is going to die by the sword. Yeah, you can strike them. You can get them back. You can make them feel how you feel too, but then what? Then they go back and come back and do the same thing, and it just keeps going back and forth. For how long? For how long? And Jesus wants to show Peter that there has to be another way. And Jesus isn't just going to tell him that. He's going to show him. He's going to show him by his death and his resurrection that there has to be another way besides just getting him back and making him feel how you feel. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Don't you think? I could call on my Father, and he would at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels. But then would the scriptures be fulfilled in the way that it must happen in this way? So in that hour, Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I've sat in the temple courts and teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." So they bring this whole crowd of people this is going to get violent. And Jesus is like, "You've missed it. You've missed the whole thing. I don't have a sword. I don't know why Peter has a sword. He's not supposed to have a sword. But I don't need a sword. I'm going to show you something completely different. I'm going to show you the power of forgiveness. We're going to go to Good Friday so that we can get to Easter Sunday. And you're going to see that there is a way to begin again." So Jesus gets arrested, goes to trial. And now we get another mention of Judas. The gravity of it hits Judas. It's like he's getting caught up in this whole thing. He's mad at Jesus for whatever reason. Jesus did not fulfill his expectations for whatever reason. So he takes the 30 pieces of silver and he hands Jesus over. But something happens within Judas. It doesn't even say what or how. But he starts to feel bad for what he did. He's had this call to confession. And he's looking for some words of assurance. And so he tries to undo it in some way. Can I get the next slide? So when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. I have sinned, he said, for I have betrayed innocent blood. So what I would say now is that Judas is experiencing Good Friday in all of its fullness. But the Good Friday in his own life, right? Where he's like, there's nothing I can do to undo this now. What I've done is done. And I'm seeing the impact of it now. I'm watching it rip through the lives of all these other disciples, and it's not feeling how I thought it would feel, and now I feel bad. I wish I could change it, but I can't. But the only thing I can do is bring back the 30 pieces of silver. I have sinned, for I have betrayed innocent blood. And the chief priests, next slide, like, what is that to us? They replied. That's your responsibility. What is that to us? They replied. That's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. And then he went away and he hanged himself. Thought about that line all week. So Judas threw away the money, threw the money into the temple and left. And then he went away and hanged himself. That's dark. That is some Netflix special stuff right there. So Judas takes the money, his 10 grand, or whatever it was, throws it, and he walks away. And I think for Judas, he was living so much in Good Friday that he couldn't see that Easter was coming. He was living so much in Good Friday, and he couldn't see that Easter was coming, and it's so sad. I wish he just knew that Easter was coming. I wish he knew there was a way to begin again. I wish he knew that there was amazing grace. I wish he knew that he could be forgiven. I wish he knew that whoever he was, whatever he did, however long it's been, that the door is always open, that there's always a place for forgiveness. You see, we always kind of point our finger at Judas and we say, the betrayer, right? We look at him for what he did. But the person of Judas is also a memorial of tragedy, of someone who lived in Good Friday and couldn't see that Easter was coming. For those of you who are here that have been living in Good Friday, that have experienced incredible loss, or have experienced some deep brokenness in your life, in your family's life, whatever it is that you've gone through, know that Easter's coming. That the tomb is empty. That Jesus is risen from the dead, and because of that, life overcomes death every time. Hope overcomes despair. Love has already won. There's amazing grace. There's a way to begin again. And the things that you've done in your life, the brokenness that you've experienced, the loss that you've had, the grief that you carry does not have the last word in your life. Light does. Love does. Hope does. Why? Because he's risen. Amen?